Kickstarter backers, you're in for a treat today. I know that this was the interview that's coming a little bit later than the Christmas Vertigo Marathon, but it's worth the wait, I can guarantee you, because we have, for the next hour, SANDMAN Mystery Theater architects, co-writers, Matt Wagner and Stephen T. SEAGLE. Welcome,
You said
guys.
that tauntingly, like you're not sure if that's my name after 28 years.
I paused on the T because there's been a debate about what the T stands for, and I still think it stands for Tiberius Tyrant.
I wish it did. I wish it
did. Matt, do you have a middle initial?
Yeah, B.
I'm gonna go Boyd.
Okay.
Nope, you'll never guess. It's Brown.
Oh, Brown.
Old family name. Yep.
That's cool.
All right. All right. So guys, thank you so much for joining us on this very special interview. We're going back, way back in time, somewhere between 1930 and 1993, when SANDMAN Mystery Theater first came out, one of the very first Vertigo launches, early 93. You guys were together before I walked in the door at Vertigo. So before we get into the backer questions, I want to know, how did the two of you get together as co-writers?
Well, Steve, you want to take that?
You do your part, and then I'll tell how it really went down.
Yeah. Steve came in after the first year. I was kind of there from the beginning. Karen Berger, Vertigo founder Karen Berger and editor-in-chief, had been after me to do something with her for a while. And at that point, she, I think, had the initial ideas for what would become Vertigo. It was not an existing imprint at that point. And of course, SANDMAN had come out and was a huge hit, and they were trying to figure out how they could capitalize that on the best they could. But what made SANDMAN special was Neil's writing. And, you know, unless you could clone him and duplicate or triplicate his working hours, you couldn't really have him writing a whole bunch of books. So I came up with the idea to, the same way Neil had taken the name Sandman, which was a long-running DC character name that had been through several different iterations, and gave it an entirely different approach and narrative structure. I decided to take that, what Neil had established, applied it to the original version of the character, and kind of relaunch things with that new outlook in mind. In the very first issue of SANDMAN, it talks about how when Morpheus is imprisoned for 60 plus years, or I forget however long it is, the spiritual and supernatural repercussions of his imprisonment lead to a certain number of events in people, one being that Wesley Dodds becomes haunted by various dreams and is driven to assume a disguise and fight crime at night. So we took that as kind of our springboard, and this was coupled with the fact that I also at that point wanted to do something with artist Guy Davis. At that point, he was doing a book for indie publisher Caliber Comics called Baker Street, which, if you've never seen it, was a contemporary punk female Sherlock Holmes. And I really loved Guy's work on that. I contacted Guy and I said, you know, look, let's make a pitch to DC in some fashion. You know, this was at the stage when everybody was renovating characters from the past, giving them an updated contemporary version. And I said to Guy, just go through the DC who's who and send me a list of characters that might interest you. So no big surprise that they were all characters with hats and cloaks. But one of them was the Golden Age Sandman. And he said to me, well, I know they won't let us do this one because of Gaiman's Sandman. And I said, no, that's why they will let us do it. Because it uses the name and you don't have to use Neil. So, you know, it's the same brand, but with a different flavor. And also around this time, I had started to become very interested in contemporary crime fiction, dating back to Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler, and up through Jim Thompson and David Goodis, the writers of the 50s, James M. Cain. So I wanted to do some kind of hard-boiled crime stuff. And again, at the same time, I've always embraced the pulp motifs of the classic pulp characters. And in fact, the Golden Age Sandman was one of DC's first costume characters. And when you look at those very early comics, of course, the tropes that become comic book staples eventually aren't established yet. So they're very much informed by classic pulp traditions. They very much feel like pulp magazine adventures. And I'd always loved the Shadow particularly, and the Sandman was kind of a version of the Shadow. I pitched this to Karen, and let me preface this by saying I got Guy to do a couple of character designs, and that's where he came up with this whole new, very retro kind of look for the character, much more based in kind of a reality style of things rather than the more comic booky look. His gas gun looked like something he had built at home. He was wearing an actual World War I gas mask. He was wearing a fedora and a trench coat, not a cape. And
the colors, if I can just interject, my God, the colors in the early versions of the Golden Age Sandman were quite garish. And I think the palette in Sandman Mystery Theater was very subdued in many arcs, which I think was like so much cooler.
Yeah, we were trying to strike, we didn't want this guy wearing, an orange hat and a green cape and those early days of comic books, they had to make every element like a different bright color because the printing and the registration was so shitty that they had to make sure you could tell the hands from the clothing, so everything was
a bunch of bananas.
Yeah, everything was right. Everything was very, very garish and very local color, as you would call it. So anyway, we presented all that to Karen, and she loved it. Again, falling back on the pulp tradition, my initial idea was to have every adventure be 4 issues long, so that it was about, once you collected it, it was about the width of a pulp magazine. And we took it from there. After the first 3 storylines, so 12 issues, I realized that with my commitments to my own title, Grendel, I was not going to be able to continue this by myself, which is when I decided to reach out to Steve and see if he would come on board as co-writer.
Which happened this way. Matt's like, hey, come up to Portland for a minute. I want to talk to you about something, which it's the best offer for a date I had in a long time. So I flew up to Portland and I got to his magnificent home, and he said, you want to eat? And Matt's a great cook. So if he asks you if you want to eat and he's going to cook, the answer is yes. And I'm like, you betcha. He's like, okay, got to go to the store. And he hands me his newborn baby and he leaves. And I'm like, okay, I came here for mysterious reasons to talk about something about Sandman Mystery Theater. And instead I have no Matt and a baby. And it was like a lone wolf and cub moment where I'm like, I don't know what to do with this baby. And it was crying. Was it Amanda or was it Brennan? I don't even remember.
It was Amanda, yeah.
Amanda. A baby girl, no less.
Yes. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't have one of these. But every time I leave the refrigerator, she cries. So I'm going to stay by the refrigerator. I'm going to open the refrigerator. I'm going to get the bottle out of the refrigerator. And then Matt came back and I'm still holding this baby. And he starts cooking and he's like, all right, let's talk about what we're going to do. So sans even addressing whether we should do it or not, we just started doing it. And he was talking through ideas he had for Mystery Theater. And I didn't even know how we would work together. I assumed we were both like super strong creative brains and we just fight and that'd be the end of it in one day. And instead, it was magic from the get-go, super easy from the get-go, definite similar wavelengths and mindsets about a lot of stuff and different in ways that helped. And then my job became to not let him leave ever until I couldn't stop him.
And the way it broke down was we basically handle, we would come up with story ideas together and chat them through, but then I would write the plot. And basically that would be, page 1, here's what happens. Page 2, here's what happens. And that had no dialogue, no captioning, none of that yet. Occasionally I'd throw in a line or 2 of dialogue just for flavor. But then it would go to the artist to draw it. Then it would come back to Steve and he would script it with all the dialogue, all the captions. And of course, he'd show it to me and we'd match up and I might make a suggestion or 2 here or there, but that was a really clean and even division of labor that just seemed to work out well, like he said.
Yeah, and it's pretty inextricable. It's like who did what. I mean, we had our jobs to do, but it wouldn't have been the same without us together. I mean,
Put
it
it
was
together,
great,
yeah.
great without me, but it was great with Matt. And then every time Matt would be like, "Ah, it's another year. I've got to move on to other things." Be like, "No, no, no. Let's talk."
I think what's interesting is that we refer to that as the Marvel style when it's plot first. And most of the Vertigo books were full script.
Mhm.
So it made this book very unique. Matt, I want to know why Stephen T. Siegel. And if I can
I do
answer,
too.
I want to tell you why I think you chose Steve. You can tell me I'm wrong, and I'm rarely wrong,
Ooh.
but Steve's writing for Kamiko, I think, was super sophisticated and beyond belief as far as I'm concerned. I still think that his first Grendel tale is the best Grendel tale, and it's one of my favorite single issues ever written in comics. No offense to anyone who's listening.
Right.
But
I've got the vapors. I have to fan myself now.
Please tell us, Matt, why Stephen T. Siegel, writer of the Amazon?
Had you and I met when I did the Mage Tour back in '85? Did you come to
I
that?
I met Matt when I was in college, like pre-comics or
And you
like
interviewed me for something, right?
I did, yeah. I saw you
Fanboy.
tumble out of your touring van in a wafting pot smoke cloud and was like, "That's Matt Wagner."
But what made me think of Steve? I can spotlight the exact thing, and it was the Amazon. And that was because I was such good pals with Tim Sale, so I really had an eye on it, and was really impressed with Steve's writing, and also the fact that he had a grasp on real world issues and real world depictions. And I wasn't sure that he would be interested in something that was a period piece like this, but he was. And
Yeah, I mean, I love period pieces, but I told Matt right at the get-go, I'm like, mystery, no, like I don't understand them. I couldn't construct one if I had to. And he's like, "I'll take care of that." He's like, "Just make them real." So
well, and the key to the mysteries is they're not all whodunits.
No.
Sometimes they're howdunnits and whydunits.
they're Columbo-y more than
Yeah.
yeah.
Sometimes you know right away who the villain is. Sometimes you don't.
And the core of the book was always the relationship anyway. Like the mysteries served to underline what was happening with Wes and Diane. It wasn't Wes.
Yeah, there were two kind of my own spin on things, two contemporary things I wanted to bring to this whole narrative. One being, like I said, I had interest in doing noir and crime fiction. And noir and crime fiction tends to be, in its classic sense, kind of right-wing and kind of conservative and kind of misogynistic. So I wanted to turn that on its ear. And, you think of the progressive movement in America and liberalism kind of, starting in the 60s. It didn't at all. It started much earlier than that. In fact, Dashiell Hammett, the acknowledged originator of hard-boiled fiction in America, was brought up and tried before the House Un-American Activities Committee, and ended up doing time because he wouldn't rat out friends of his as being members of the Communist Party. So I wanted to show that there were people that had progressive thoughts back in the 20s and 30s. And the other thing, especially about comic books and comic book relationships, is they are all so angst-ridden. They are all so, I can't be with you, that sort of shit. And I wanted to portray this healthy relationship with these characters that truly loved each other, and that stemmed from the original comics. In the original Golden Age comics, Diane Belmont knows who Wesley Dodds is, knows his secret identity. It's extremely unusual for the time. I have to think it was directly inspired by Lamont Cranston and Margot Lane from the radio show. Margot knew who Lamont Cranston was, that he was the Shadow. But even so, that it just stood out as a real singular thing in comics at the time. So again, as Steve said, the core of the stories was always the more important part was always Diane and Wesley's relationship. And in fact, if you look at the entire run of the series, every 12 issues, every year, their relationship went through a significant step of some kind. If you go back and look, it's she finds out who he is, they move in together, they et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I was always really happy with the balance we struck there, and the fact that we could again have a romantic pairing that was healthy.
Yeah, and I also appreciated that every story arc shifted narrative point of view from Wes to Diane and back.
Yeah, yeah,
So
making them equal footing on
equal
the
partners in the book. And people always are, to me at least, describe the book as looking at current social issues with a historical lens. And you know, I love research. Matt loves research. These things happened then. Like it
Yeah.
was stuff that happened then. You know, the language was the language of then. It's like, well, you used fuck and they don't say fuck. They use fuck all the time.
You bet they fucking did. Yeah. They just didn't print it. They just didn't print it.
Exactly.
I have to say, I think you guys handled the stories and the characters so well. To me, it was a very feminist take on
Totally.
noir fiction. And you know, you said it yourself, Matt, there was a lot of misogyny in those writings from back in the day in the 30s. And I loved what the two of you brought to modern comics in a period piece. And I loved being an assistant editor on the book, I must say.
Another inspiration for their relationship was the relationship of, again, Dashiell Hammett and the playwright Lillian Hellman, who had a
definitely on my side a lot of that.
Yeah, who had a very equitable relationship and a very intelligent relationship. In fact, Hammett based their personal banter. Hammett based Nick and Nora Charles's banter upon he and Lillian's back and forths in real life. And so again, as Steve said, the examples, it wasn't like we were turning back time. We were actually showing some of the reality of the day.
And that time doesn't change. The fact that those issues are still the issues is both enlightening and pathetic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're still the issues. If we did the series now 30 years later or whatever, that would still be the same shit.
Same shit. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask a couple of backer questions, if that's cool.
Sure.
So Matt, given the popularity of comic book movies, which stars of the 30s and 40s would you have wanted to see cast? And which story arc would you prefer translated to the screen?
Yeah, you prepped me with this one and I was thinking about it. So I think in the role of Wesley, I'm going to go with Dick Powell, who was, I think, very poorly cast a couple times as Philip Marlowe. He never struck me as Philip Marlowe. He's maybe a little bit too tall for Wesley, but he has kind of softish features, slightly receding hairline. And if you put a pair of round glasses on him, I could see him as Wesley pretty easily. As far as Diane, I think maybe a young Rosalind Russell. She certainly had the Spitfire attitude. Steve, what about you?
Oh yeah, Steve.
I misread the question and thought it was current day, and I was like, I don't ever do this game, but for some reason I came to very odd people I don't think of often, which is Chris Maloney before he got super buff. Who's kind of I'm thinking of the TV show version of this instead of the movie version, and Imogene Poots for Diane. I have no idea why, like totally out of left field for me on both of those.
I had an oddball bit of contemporary casting, although he's a little too old for the role now, but I'm good buddies with Patton Oswalt. And
I love Patton. I gave Patton a page of Guy Davis original art because I worked with him on a comedy show last year. Yeah.
Well, you know, he would. It's a kind of a different take because, of course, he would bring an element of levity to the role that isn't really there in the comics. But I think that'd be like I said, an interesting take on it. So
actually, I was thinking I had two ideas. If anyone cares, I was thinking you and McGregor. I was thinking you and McGregor just because I would follow him into a bubbling volcano. And I'm also thinking Paul Weller just because I want to meet him.
No, that seems cheap. You and McGregor, he would definitely have his penis out in SANDMAN Mystery Theater. Though.
And Paul would play Diane. Is that what you're saying?
That would be fine. Okay, here's another question. Steve, I'm going to go with you first on this one. If you could write or illustrate your favorite concert or movie-going experience, what would it be about? Which concert or which movie?
I definitely wouldn't be a movie. I've done a couple of movie adaptations, and that's just like, how do I take something long and make it short and uninteresting? So I'm going to go music. I think instead of a concert, kind of a concert. I saw The Black Rider, which is this Tom Waits.
Oh, wow. Lucky you. Yeah.
Crazy ass. musical, opera, I don't know. But we saw it, and it was the strangest fucking thing I've ever seen on stage in my life. I don't know what was happening. I couldn't have been more interested. I was laughing my head off, and my wife Lisa was too, and everyone else in the theater was like groaning and leaving. And I loved it so much. I saw it again the next day and loved it just as much 24 hours.
Wow.
So
Wow.
it's all this German expressionist design. I would go with that.
Cool.
I'll get to your question there in a second, Shell, but I actually have a story that ties into that. A number of years ago, I was at WonderCon, and I ran into a friend of mine from PDX from Portland, and he said to me, "Hey, are you going to be at your table?" I was out wandering around. You going to be at your table later? I have a friend I want you to meet. I said, "Yeah, I'm headed right back there in a few minutes." So I'm back at my table. I'm chatting with somebody, and behind me, I hear my friend's voice say, "Hey, Matt, I want you to meet." And I turn around and he goes, "This is Tom and Kathleen." And it was Tom Waits and his wife, Kathleen. I've met a lot of famous people, but this was the only time I kind of went,
Sweet.
I recovered quickly, I will say.
My embarrassing celebrity is Jaime Hernandez, who now lives in my neighborhood, and I could not be a bigger idiot every single time I see him.
Okay, so my concert would be a concert. And it was the first concert I ever went to, and it was Kiss.
Oh yeah.
And
Matt Wagner Kiss would be awesome.
It was
Yeah.
fucking magnificent, right? And, it was my senior year in high school. I just graduated. It was that summer, and it was every bit of the spectacle you wanted. Breathing fire, spitting blood. Gene Simmons flew up onto the rigging and stood up there to sing a song. At one point, Ace Frehley's like playing his guitar real fast, and it starts to smoke, and then it catches on fire, and he lets go of it, and levitates up in the air, and it's still playing. And he runs off stage and grabs another guitar and comes back, and he's picking real fast, and he goes like this, and something shoots out of the end of the other guitar, and the first guitar blows up. And to top it all off, at the very end of our row was a woman in her mid-50s sitting under a pile of coats and looking fucking miserable. She was obviously some group of kids chaperone, and god damn did she look awful. She just looked like, fuck that shit, I'm gonna get out of here as soon as I can.
My first concert was the Police at Red Rocks Amphitheater in Colorado. Shelley, your first concert?
The Cars at the Spectrum in Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's a good mark on all of us there.
Matt, I have to ask you this. Did you wear makeup to the Kiss concert? And if so, no. Okay. Yeah. It probably would have been a mistake. You would have been sweating it off, right?
Yeah. I will say the group of people I went with were not particular Kiss fans. By the end of the show, everybody on their feet like this,
Yeah. That's how you do a concert. Yeah. You got to get into it. All right, I'm going to ask another question here. Matt, I'll throw this one to you. What's a storytelling moment that you're really proud of? Whether it's a breakthrough after a struggle or just a moment of brilliance that either you or Steve came up with?
You mean specifically in SMT?
Yeah.
I think I love so many of the moments and the various crimes. Again, the integrating what basically we've come to call hate crimes and examining them. Those have always existed. We just gave them a label recently, examining them through the lens of that time period. But I think it was awfully fun when we did The Hour Man and we first started to incorporate some of the DC continuity into this lens that we were viewing things through. There again, in the early appearances of The Hour Man, he advertises in the classified sections, and he's known as the man of the hour, and all of that really clicked for me and brought a whole different new level of fun to the proceedings.
How about you, Steve?
Well, here's one, since this is for SMT lovers, that almost maybe no one has ever noticed really, is that for the 50th issue, there's a really extended dream that Wesley has, and it's literally part of every other dream before that dream from all the issues. So it's like a collage pastiche of everything that happened up until then. I've left all the air out of the room with that answer. You're welcome.
I'm racking my brain and thinking about that and thinking, wow, how did that happen? I wanted to say that I loved how you brought Ouija into Sandman Mystery Theatre.
Photographer, yeah.
Like a real crime scene photographer.
Yep.
Like that set off like so much for me. I started to actually go doing more research about photojournalism because of working on Sandman Mystery.
Matt sent me a book of Ouija's photos, which I had not seen, and they were stunningly hideous.
Horrific.
Yeah.
Well, what did we call him in the book? We didn't call him Ouija. Was it Fiji?
I think it might have been Fiji, yeah.
So he first appeared in the annual we did that was all short stories based around this Central Park mugger, and that story arose as a result of me checking out Ouija's photos, and one of them was the stuffed and posed costume of this mugger that had been haunting Central Park. And we used that exact photo for the reference for the mugger. And, you know, one of the things that really impressed me was the mugger wore big blocks on his feet to make him appear 6 inches taller. So he was obviously some, you know, fairly short, probably European immigrant. And his, you know, his, I think he had a World War I helmet on, a doughboy helmet, and a pair of aviator goggles. And it was just so thrown together at home sort of costuming, and that really echoed the real world aesthetic we were absolutely trying to strike.
It's crazy to me to think about how someone could run in those big block shoes. I mean, it's like,
it's not crazy to you because you own shoes that have 6 inches. You have run from,
but they're not tied onto her with just ropes around the feet.
Right. And also there's an arch. A good platform has a nice arch. Okay. And also I'm certain that the Central Park mugger did not tap dance in his spare time. And
I'm not certain that the Central Park mugger wasn't you, because the Central Park mugger, under all this burlap sack, World War whatever, had a Perez jumpsuit on.
Another aspect of that storyline that was real is the at one point he's being chased. I forget if it's by Wesley or by the police, but he dashes through Central Park, and Central Park's full of people sleeping out because it's the middle of the summer and it's hot. And that people used to do that. They would go sleep in the park. You know, of course, not anymore, but back then, you know,
once that mugger showed up and ruined everything.
People laying there in blankets and sleeping bags. You know.
Steve, I want to ask this one to you. This is a specific question from a backer. And he writes, I'm struggling with the direction of a couple of projects because the characters are pushing me around and I'm getting frustrated. While writing, do you ever tell your characters, quote, I'm sorry, but I want the story to go this way, whether you like it or not? Or do you let the characters control the story?
The only book I ever worked on where I talked about the character doing things I didn't want was American Virgin, and that's because I wanted to blast religion in that book, organized religion at least. I'm in.
Congratulations. You did it well, and I would know because I was writing shotgun with you.
You were. But what I was going to say was I couldn't do what I wanted because as I wrote the character, I felt like his beliefs were sound, and I was like, motherfucker, how do I have to be true to this guy's thoughts? But I would say, just as quick advice for that question, these days I have different working methods all the time, but these days it's all about what's it about? What's at the end? Where are you going? What are you giving someone? So your character shouldn't be pushing you around. Your character should be delivering me to that. What's the thing you're giving me if I read your whole 120 pages or whatever? What do I leave with that changes me as a person after? And all the character stuff should be driving to that idea all the time, as far as I'm concerned. Matt?
Yeah, I'm with you in regards to figuring out kind of what you want to deliver at the end, but then the path there can be left open from my method of working. And I'll tell a story about this. One time I was at a con in Britain, and we drove up and spent the night at Alan Moore's house. And this is when he was working on Big Numbers. He was self-publishing a book called Big Numbers, which was only ever got up to issue 3, I think.
Yeah.
Like 2 came out and 3 you can find on the internet.
With Bill Sienkiewicz and Al Columbia, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, right. But it was supposed to be 10 issues long ultimately. So he took me up to his writing studio, and he had one of those giant sketch pads, you know, the 18 by 24 version. And he had it divvied off in 10 columns vertically. And then let's say there were about 30 characters and 30 columns this way. So that he had all this checkerboard of squares. And in the tightest, most psychotic little handwriting you'd ever seen, he filled in everything that happened to every character per issue all the way down. And I just looked at him and said, dude, you and I don't work alike. And it was only years later I read Stephen King's On Writing, his memoir of being a writer. And he talks about how he is not, similar to me, he's not a copious note taker or pre-planner. He comes up with the idea, like Steve's talking about, with an idea about what your story structure is and where you want to get to. He creates his characters, and then he follows his characters through the story. They lead him. Again, like Steve said, you kind of want to know where you want to end up, but you let the characters lead you around through the story at their own pace, in their own manner, to get you to where you want to go.
That let's have that question asker look up Javier Grillo Marx Watch, which is kind of like it sounds, has an essay called "What's an Operational Theme and Why Don't I Have One?" And that is the best explanation that I've ever read of this sort of conversation.
And on a similar but different note, how do you know when to call a page a finished page? Steve, over to you first.
I do a lot of workshops and stuff, and I teach a lot of classes. And my latest thing about all that is that writing is 5 things, not 1 thing. So it's pre-writing, where you're just like, you have no idea, just the world is happening and you're experiencing it, and that may show up later. Then free writing, you go, oh, you know what? I heard this crow fall to its death in my driveway, and I looked at it and it was full of maggots, whatever. I don't know why I thought of that. Mystery theater. And I'm going to write that down and maybe do something with it later, but I don't know what. Then writing is where you get intention, and you go, that crow maggot thing, I'm making that into something. And I'm going to tell people this thing about the way the world works, and I'm going to start working on it. So you do. Then you get into a loop of edit, where you're like, okay, what worked and what didn't work? And you make yourself notes, but you don't fix them. Then later you fix them, and you get in this cycle: edit, rewrite, edit, rewrite, edit, rewrite. But the 5th step is finish. Like, you have to go, at some point this thing is done. And I have friends who it's never done. Like, there's always, I'm gonna fuck that. You've got to tell yourself at some point you're letting go, and that's that. You know, Lucas changing Star Wars, people were like, hey, you should have left it alone. I did that with my first comic, Kafka. I went through and fixed some stuff and relettered it. And I was like, oh shit, I'm just gonna go back to the original one. And then I went back to a different, like, just let go, let it be, draw the line.
Matt.
Yeah, one of the greatest, of course I can apply it to art too, because I draw, but one of the greatest skills of a comic creator is knowing when to call it done. I had a teacher in art school who was a local commercial illustrator, and he claimed his wife used to suddenly rush into the studio and snatch something off his easel and go, that's done.
Yes. A deadline. It's why a deadline is so important, I think, because I always tell students finished is better than perfect. It's never going to be perfect. And you know what? If it's that bad, or if there's a typo, you can fix it in the trade, or you can fix it in the next printing. But for myself, as someone who likes writing as much as sticking hot pokers in my eyes, I give myself a time limit. I have a legit egg timer, because unless I really give myself a hard out, I am just going to like rip out my hair. You know, it's not something I like to do. And I also think it's one of the things that makes having a really great editor an important part of making comics, because the editor is there to keep you on the straight and narrow, and to sometimes yank that artboard or that script out of your hands.
Well, and that's what deadlines are for. When you're given a deadline, you have a all right, got to be done by then. You know, and as a comic artist, you know, yes, nothing's ever perfect, and you're going to be dissatisfied with almost everything, you know, to a certain degree, because it involves so much drawing. You know, you think about for people that aren't professional artists, you know, you think about doing a drawing. Well, every page has 6, 4, 7, 8 drawings on it, and every issue has 20, 22 pages. You're doing a ton of drawing, and you just got to go, all right, that's done. all right, I don't particularly love that hand in that panel. I'll get it better the next time. You know, you always got to be looking to the next panel. You know, I'll do it better next time. I'll do it better next time. You know,
And I think it's because the percentage of error is so great in making a single issue of a comic book. But the most important thing is to keep it moving forward.
Yep.
You never want to stop. I say that editing comics is like keeping the comic alive, you know, just like a baby, you know, you need to keep, you need to keep it watered and fed. You need to keep it moving in the right direction.
You need to hand it off to strangers who show up in your kitchen.
Right?
Well, they cook you dinner, motherfucker.
It was delicious too.
So I asked each of you to bring an artifact from our Sandman Mystery Theater days. Steve, it looks like you actually
He has his background.
Right? I know. Steve transformed.
I have to turn off my fake background to show my artifacts. So I will reveal my actual office when I figure out technically how to do that. Okay, and I'm actually going to kill my black and white filter for a minute because I have this gorgeous, it's one of the few things that sits by my desk is Guy Davis.
Wow.
Beautiful original Sandman piece. He's got the little stuffed Sandman doll there. The gun, the gas mask. And we can't do a conversation of Sandman Mystery Theater without underlining that the solid glue, despite the many talented other artists we had, was Guy Davis, who in Matt's outline, you know, Matt would go, hydropower electric dam inside. And then Guy Davis draws that, and you go, Guy, how did you research that? Oh, I didn't do any research.
They just made it up.
Just know what it looks like in my brain. Like, what?
Yeah.
It was that way with everything. Like, the reason we could do Marvel
and
style,
everything in the Zipatone.
Oh,
I loved how Guy did everything on the board, and he used Zipatone like nobody's business.
And I think it was rubbed down, wasn't it?
Probably, yeah.
No, it's cut out.
Yeah, it was like Letraset.
Let me interject here that the little doll, that the little effigy that Wesley tucks into bed when he goes out as the Sandman at night, that is from the very first appearance in the original Golden Age comics. And that was just so fucking weird when I read the original adventure. I was just like, look, he's tucking in a little doll to bed, and he says, "Good night, Mr. Wesley Dodds," as he goes off to be the Sandman. And I was like, that's too strange. We have to include that, you know.
Yeah. But much love to Guy Davis, who made it easy. The last thing I was going to say was, when we talk about doing it Marvel style only works if the artist has the wherewithal to give you expressions and postures that communicate something. And, you know, as Matt said, we go, they're having a tiff in the outline, you know, but what's that tiff about? Well, I don't know. But when you look at Guy's characters, you go, oh shit, she's mad about the sex last night or whatever. You know, it just seems so apparent in the subtext of their bodies and their expressions and their whatever, that the Guy could draw anything, including the most subtle human emotion.
So I want to thrust in here, the reason we did this Marvel style is that's how I brought that over from Grendel. That's how I worked on the whole first many issues of Grendel. And the reason being, when I did the first Grendel story arc, Devil by the Deed, I wrote and drew that myself, and it was featured as a backup feature in the back of Mage. And we then collected it. The publisher at the time asked me, we want you to continue this? And, you know, at the time I had just finished Grendel, I had just finished Mage. I felt like I needed a bit of a break of some kind. I felt like I wanted to try something new. So I decided to have other artists on board Grendel, and I would write for other artists, something I had never done before. And I felt like I wanted to try this plot and dialogue style of writing because I wanted to make it more of a true collaboration, because I felt like if I want that, you know, if I wanted that level of control and that level of description that Alan Moore puts into all his scripts, I should just draw it.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
the only
fair
thing
enough.
for me to do it was to provide some opportunity for the artist to bring a huge thing to the table themselves. And as Steve said, you know, Guy just always delivered that with home runs every time.
a masterclass, I think, in sequential storytelling when you look through those issues. And it was exciting to be an editor on the book when the pages came in, and to call Guy and to go through the pages too. And
Guy
to
also,
balloon
you
them.
know,
Ballooning them was an art in itself.
the book was, you know, not like a superhero book in that it was fairly dense on the page, decent amount of panels on the page, you know. And Guy was always so just brilliant at how he managed to get everything in there, you know, and it never looked crowded. It always looked just appropriate, you know.
And I think a lot of that had to
also,
do with how you guys paced it too. I mean, like Matt,
yeah,
you had
that
said
too.
earlier in the chat, these were 4-part arcs, like a lot of the early pulp stories, because you wanted a certain page count. So you had certain rhythms. And the penultimate issue, that third issue, always had to be chock full in such a way for the payoff to come forward. But I think each arc was so original in its subject matter. And again, in the relationship, in the entanglements between Wesley and Diane, or when Diane's father came into the mix. And I just have such great memories of working on the book. What do you have, Matt? What do you have to show us from the old days?
I actually have two things. So this is a piece by Teddy Christensen, who, and I forget why he did this. This might have just been a development piece. You know, Teddy was a trained animator, so he would just fire off these paintings all the time, just as a, no, it's Tuesday. And Teddy, of course, did the art for the Sandman Mystery Theater crossover,
Sandman Midnight Theater.
And then this is from one of the various Vertigo Gallery books.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I remember legendary that. Alex Toth.
Yeah. Wow.
Stunning.
Pretty swanky. Love it.
What is that? I can't see, Steve.
That's also Teddy, and that's the Midnight Theater.
Oh, the where they meet. Oh, I didn't realize you had that. Awesome.
Yeah, excellent. Wow, this is so great. So I thought I would bring an artifact too. Matt, did you have something else there under the desk?
No, that's it. I'm just making sure they're not laying on the ground.
The artifact I brought today is something you might not believe this. And I put a lot of money and time into the research, but I found an original perfume bottle that was used by Diane Belmont when she was going out on her first date with Wesley Dodds.
So this is something the guy drew in that you later found the actual piece for?
No, I'm lying.
You're just making up bullshit. You're just slinging hash.
In fact, I didn't even need to say what.
Oh, good God.
Plausible enough. I bought it.
Good. You should go on the Liars Club. We'll make news.
Matt, we'll always have Kimiko. That's all I'm going to say. I want to do a lightning round with you guys. You guys, I'm so thrilled you were able to join me for this wonderful video chat. Let's jump to the lightning round. It's a lot of fun. So I'm talking quick. Steve, there's no need to give us a monologue. I want fast answers.
Makes you think I'm the
What is your
monologue
favorite cover run from Sandman Mystery Theater? Stephen T.
I'm going to go for Phantom of the World's Fair.
And why is that?
Because I just love the World's Fair anyway. So that just has to be the first one that comes to mind for me.
Okay, Matt, your favorite cover run?
I'm going to point to two. One is the Vamp, because I love the color scheme on those four.
Oh, those were great. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other one is the Mist, which utilized only New York architecture.
Also great. Gavin and Richard on covers.
Right. I want to say big props to Richard Bruning, who did the design work on the logo and all the covers every month.
Yep.
And Gavin Wilson, terrific New York-based photographer at the time, and also the big boss Karen Berger, and the letterer John Costanza, who remains one of my favorite letterers of all time in comics. Love that guy. And we had a few colorists, but David Hornung, I believe, was our first colorist on the series.
Yep.
Okay. Second question, I'm going to hit Matt up first for this one. What is your favorite Vertigo title that you were not involved in?
I'm going to go with a single issue special, We Three.
Oh, that was great. Yeah.
Excellent. Grant Morrison and
Frank
Whiteley.
Whiteley about three cyber engineered household pets who are cyber engineered to be combat soldiers. Very,
Yeah,
very
that was a
touching,
good
very,
one.
very sad, very heartwarming all at the same time. Great, great, and beautiful, beautiful art by Frank.
Definitely. All right, Stephen T.
I mean, I could go so many ways, but just because you said Grant Morrison, I'm going to go with Doom Patrol with Richard Case because I love the Brotherhood of Dada.
Yeah, excellent stuff. Last question, Steve, over to you first. Who wins in a fight? Wesley Dodds, Diane Belmont, or Joe Strummer?
It's Diane. If you think otherwise, you were dead wrong.
Yeah, and Matt, what about you? Who wins
Joey
in a
Ramone.
fight?
Joey Ramone.
No, that is not the right answer. I thought we had, Matt, I thought we had the Clash in the Jam. Okay. Anyway, thank you guys so much. It's been a blast. And I heard a rumor that there's actually going to be a complete Sandman Mystery Theater collection. Is that true?
It's a two omnibus thing, you know, cashing in on the success of Sandman on Netflix.
But if our track record is any indicator, they'll put out one of the two.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Okay, well, fingers crossed that actually people can actually read this amazing storyline that I think was one of the first Vertigo series that launched the imprint back in 1993.
It was the second title. Enigma was number one, was the first one.
Oh, but it was one of the first. It was part of the
The
first
launch
rollout.
wave.
The first new wave. All right, guys. Thanks so much and take care.
Peace. It was fun. Bye.
Peace.